A lot of questions have been raised recently about the Trump tariffs. I find them very interesting and kind of silly, but I'll explain a little more about what I think and what I think the future truly holds. You know, so far, you're looking at the stock market, you see massive dips, but then you see massive increases and people getting back in, because of these Trump tariffs where he's kind of pausing them for a lot of countries. You see that on China, he's increasing to like, I think 125%. And so now basically where we're at is you have two sides of the MAGA faction, the Republican Party is, you have the super, nationalist protectionist people saying, we got to keep these tariffs, we got to make the countries pay this, that, and the third. And then you have, I guess more reasonable people who are saying, no, we need an off ramp. These tariffs are insane. Um, there is not one single economist that's going to say a really big tariff in the long run is viable, it's beneficial. Um, it's kind of common practice, common knowledge at this point that tariffs in their own right, the tariff themselves are not really that good. But, I guess going back to the equation, so to speak, that the Trump administration released about what these tariffs are and what reciprocally, so to speak, tariffing other people. Instead of actually finding the tariff rate and actually calculating that, the average tariff rate, they use based on trade deficits. And trade deficits may sound bad, um, but it's just kind of like one of those economic terms that you use to measure, how two countries interact with each other. A trade deficit is only, how much product are we delivering to them versus how much product they're delivering to us. And believe it or not, just because we are in a trade deficit with Chad or Somalia or these, small underdeveloped African countries does not mean that they're screwing us over. And I also found it funny how Trump put a 10% tariff on a lot of countries that have zero tariffs on us. But I think the reason why Trump did this, I'm not saying I endorse it, but I think the reason why he did this is just because, you know, Trump is a macho man. He wants to flex his muscles. He wants to, you know, beat his chest like he's King Kong on the Empire State Building, saying, pay up the world. You have to pay up to us. We as a America, the most powerful country, we're not gonna keep bowing down to you. And I think he takes that extent a little too far, but I think there is a little bit of merit to say that yes, as Americans, we are one of the highest, if not the highest, consumer market. The value of the U.S. dollar is so lucrative for a lot of these developing countries like India and China that they're able to make massive amount of profits while we are able to get the lowest prices. With that being said, we have become too dependent on a lot of countries for manufacturing. However, like I said before, and like I'll say it again, tariffs are not the answer. Um, but you see a lot of these pauses with these tariffs, and now you have these two factions of the MAGA party. Um, I am not MAGA, obviously, but I would take the side of saying, please get an off ramp, right? Hopefully this idea, a lot of countries have come forward allegedly to say, hey, we want a zero tariff deal. Even Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, who visited the White House yesterday or the day before, is like, we are very adamant for a zero tariff policy, and we would even succumb to President Trump's demands of an equal trade deficit, which I have no idea how that is feasibly possible. The state of Israel has way less people than the United States. You're supposed to tell me that the United States is supposed to buy the same amount of product from Israel as Israel is supposed to buy from us. That's kind of stupid. So you have these elementary definitions of what we label as tariffs, assuming that trade deficits are, tariffs, and assuming that a trade deficit is a bad thing. All these things culminate. But putting that aside, you have all these huge ass tariffs. And now, he's pausing them for a lot of countries. So the question for the stock market and the shareholders and the people of America is, what is the actual plan? Trump has flirted with ideas of like, we believe in these tariffs wholeheartedly and the world's going to pay this, that, and the third. But then you have people like Scott Bessent and economists that are near Trump's inner circle who are saying, the goal is to negotiate, like Japan, for example, they would like to negotiate a zero tariff trade, which I'm all for. But if you want to backtrack from the way beginning of like, you know, setting these zero tariff trade policies with all the countries, we didn't have to, put all these fucking tariffs and go in the White House Rose Garden and pull out this big sign and like crazy number percents and actually effectively do it. There's been a lot of companies already that have been affected by tariffs. For example, car manufacturers, they are saying, you know, sell what you have in inventory, that people are pausing, people are trying to circumvent these tariffs, all these sort of things. Like these tariffs are in effect. It's going to take a little bit to feel the effects to the consumer. And also another point that get brought up about tariffs is the one beneficial thing about tariffs is that they are for the American producer. If you're an American company, you benefit. Unfortunately, that's not even the case anymore because most of the resources, most of the materials, most of the capital that, let's say, WeatherTech, I think they produce inside the U.S., they're still getting their materials, their rubber, their everything. Hell, even their computer, their software, that's still getting to them from places like China, India, Bangladesh, all that kind of stuff. Rubber manufacturing, all that kind of stuff. So even if you want to call yourself a domestic producer, you are still involved with the global trade network. So if you want to move to a completely U.S. sustainable economy, just look at North Korea and look how terrible their economy is. Look how their people are starving. You look at a satellite map um, from space; their lights are completely off at night just because they don't even have enough electricity. Free trade is good. Free trade is good, and free trade will always be good. I think another side note I'd like to add is I find it funny how like Democrats have always been like pro free trade. You had NAFTA with Bill Clinton, like pro free trade on the international scale. NAFTA really didn't do much, however. But you have pro free trade, but domestically, we want the government to be at the hands of every single person, and we want these regulations and such and so forth. Whereas you have now the Republican faction, the Republican Party, so to speak, Trumpism, where it's like we want to loosen all regulations domestically so that producers can produce and the economy can flourish. But we want to institute super protectionist policies where global trade is at stake, and we're putting all these taxations on companies in our country that interact with the global scale. So that's kind of why I fall into that libertarian camp. It's like if you want to be free market, sure, be free market, but you don't get to pick and choose like free market is good here, free market is good there. And also, I would like to say I'm not a free market absolutist. I know what monopolies are, and I know how much um, extreme capitalism can hinder. But I'm still towards that side of free market capitalism just because you know it is beneficial. And I find it so funny how like even people like Nancy Pelosi are coming out and saying these Trump tariffs are terrible, which at the surface level they are. Um, but back in the day, I think like the White House press secretary quoted Nancy Pelosi, who was for tariffs not too long ago. So all I'm saying, and what goes to show here, I know I'm kind of going all over the place here because there's a lot to talk about. But another thing is just the idea that the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, because of these tariffs, because of these regulations, because of this command economy that Trump is looking for, there is really no difference. I mean, there is a difference, so to speak, but the Trumpism economy is not much more different than a left-leaning command economy. You're talking about increased taxes. You're talking about protectionism policies, caring for the worker, all those types of things. Hell, I was reading Obama's book and he voted against a free trade agreement just because, back in the day, those blue collar Democrats were for the American worker. But putting that all aside, I could go on and on about this, but putting that all aside, what do these tariffs really mean in the long run? And I think the best way to describe it is this idea that these tariffs are one big lottery ticket. They have the power to say, hey, all these countries come to the negotiation table and we'll all go zero tariffs, except maybe, our adversaries like China and whatnot. But let's all come to the negotiation table. Let's all get zero tariffs. Let's all benefit our own countries and our own consumers. fine, you could do that. Um, did you need to put all those tariffs to do that? Like I said before, probably not. But that's the only off ramp that I'm seeing this becomes really successful. If Trump is super adamant about his tariffs and he wants to keep them there, um, then shit is going to hit the fan. I'm not going to be, you can't make it fuzzy and sound nice when you say that. Um, but, this is one big lottery ticket. I don't know why the Trump administration went so hastily into this. I think they could have done a much more flushed out system. How about going to Japan first before putting the tariff? But, that's just Trumpism. Nothing's to be expected with the Trump era politics that we live in. It's all pretty unpredictable. But I guess those of you who are hodlers or looking to benefit from the stock market, I guess my best piece of advice would be look at Trump's actions, not his words. I think Trump as a politician, Trump as a marketer is much more different than Trump as a person and the actions his executive branch takes. So try to stay away from all the things he says and focus on the things that he does. That'll give you a better and accurate idea of what the stock market will probably look like. But I guess that's not financial advice. I don't want to get sued here. But thank you for watching, and I will see you soon.